Welcome to the Coaching Coordinator Podcast. And today we share an interesting story, something that probably would never have come about had we not run into all the things we have with the pandemic. And that's the idea of a virtual coach. And joining me today is America's first virtual coach, as far as I can tell, Brad Dal Bon, who is the outside linebackers coach at Homer High School in Alaska, even though he lives and coaches from California. So Brad, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Coach.
So very interesting scenario here. And, if we wound back the clock 12 months and you would have described this to me, or I would have described this to you, you would have looked at me like I was on drugs or something. But this is the reality we live in right now. And so we have a situation where a coach in California is using Zoom and iPads and audio to coach kids in Alaska. So let's go back to when this plan was hatched and talk to us a little bit about how this all came about, Brad.
So right when the pandemic started, it was, for me, it was March 13th. I think that was kind of the starting point for a lot of us, a lot of people. And right around that time, I started reaching out to coaching friends of mine or just people. And a friend of mine, John Jessen, a longtime coach up in Alaska,
Yep.
We just were talking about the season and is football going to happen? Just the beginnings of all that stuff back when everyone was talking about that. What's the fall going to look like? And he had mentioned that he was going to teach it at Bartlett High School up in Anchorage and then coach at Homer. And I said, how are you going to do that? He goes, well, I'm going to do a little bit in the summer or whatever, and then go down there on game days and coach, on Fridays, even though it's like a 4-hour trip for him because he's got family down in Homer. And once he mentioned that, it got me thinking, like, why don't I do that? Like, I'm not currently coaching at the school I'm at. And I jokingly said, why don't I coach with you? And we were just like laughing and got off the messaging because we were just talking through Facebook. And I got to thinking, how could I really do this? And so I thought of coaching with an iPad. Kid holds an iPad, walks around practice like me. Zoom, I had known about Zoom and video conferencing as a football coach.
Sure.
And it was a new thing for most people in education. And so the next time I talked to him just a few weeks later, I brought it up to him because I didn't know Coach Zank at Homer High School yet. I didn't know anything about the program, nothing. Didn't know how many kids went to the school, didn't know how the team was doing, no research on it at all. And I brought it up to Coach Jessen, and again, we kind of were chuckling, and he said, we should do it. And I'm like, do you think it'll work? And I said, you need to reach out to Coach Zank because he knows Justin at the time better than me, or, I didn't know him at all, like I said. And that kind of started the conversation of can it be done? Does he want it to be done? Do they need help? Do they, is this just too far-fetched? And that kind of got the ball rolling, again, late March, early April of this year.
And Coach Jessen, he's been on the podcast before when he and Daniel Esparza were
Yep.
co-head coaches. So he's been in unique situations before. They're the only coach combination like that I had on the podcast, state champions in Alaska in 2017. And so I could see John's kind of a outside the box thinker that he'd come up with this idea. What was the reply from Coach Zank? How did he think of that initially?
Well, so, I told John Jessen to talk to him, and I think he'd sent him a message, again, text or through Facebook or whatever to get a feel for how it was going. And he came back and told me that Zank was interested, and I was like, okay. So a couple more conversations back and forth with John. That's where the whole thing started with, like, I don't want to just be a huddle, breakdown guy,
Mm-hmm.
huddle assist kind of guy. I wanted to coach. I didn't want to just watch film or take notes or, do anything like that. I wanted to actually be all in with everything. And I kept feeding that to John to talk to Zank. And, after just a few conversations, Zank was, interested. And that was like, great. Okay. So now we need to talk. And so that's pushing into probably about early May. And finally talked to Coach Zank on the phone and basically had to, like, I don't know if you call it a job interview, but I kind of just spewed my resume on top of him and told him, why he should consider me helping him. I didn't really give him a choice. I just said I could do this, and if you're willing to take care of these other pieces to make it happen. Because I told him, I said, you need iPads, you need cords, speakers, you need someone to walk me around. If any of this stuff doesn't work, or you don't want to invest time into doing this and money, then I don't want to do any of it, because it was kind of an all or nothing. I didn't want to just be a film guy. And so he worked on a few things and actually got some iPads donated. And the turnaround time was quick. It was a couple weeks. And he's like, yeah, we're ready to go. And told me how to, become a volunteer at the high school, and, all the paperwork you got to do to be a coach in Alaska. Because that was the other thing I told him. I said, I want to be all in. Like, I don't want anybody questioning if this is legal or,
right.
I'm a coach. I did all the NFHS stuff that you got to do online for Alaska. And then I volunteered through their district and got fingerprinted and all that stuff you need to do, a background check. And that's into July. And again, it was still, the question of actually, because I wanted to practice doing this stuff before we got to the season, but they couldn't practice and meet because of COVID. So you're behind the scenes. COVID is still kind of blocking a lot of attempts to really get this thing going.
Right.
And, but, by that time we were kind of all in on it, but we just didn't know what it would look like, how it would go.
Yeah, that had to be the tough part, in that, the mechanics of this, not going to fall on the coaching staff. It's going to fall on a student manager to be able to get that iPad around the field and to make sure things are running the right way. It's something that I imagine, as you guys talked about it, you wanted this to be seamless, so that if something goes wrong, practice doesn't stop, right? There had to be all those plans and what ifs. What were some of the big things, I guess, you were concerned with in being able to pull this off?
Well, when it actually went down, we just picked a day when they were practicing and got the clearance to do it. And we just turned the iPad on and did it, got on the Zoom and kind of did the awkward introductions with the team managers. And, because they weren't really part of it till they were there. And then for the first week or so, I was, on the iPad kind of watching practice and moving around and kind of gingerly telling the girls that were holding the iPad to kind of move here and do that. But I wasn't really coaching. I was just watching.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I felt it was kind of going that way. It was kind of, it started like it worked. Internet worked. We got it going, looked great. But I wasn't coaching. I was kind of just viewing things, looking at Alaska. The background looked great. The sound, the mountains, everything. And then I would call Coach Zank. I'm like, we got to fix this and get me coaching. And And that's where the speaker part came in. He had a speaker, and we tried to attach get the Bluetooth through the iPad to work, and it didn't work. I think there's an issue with being on Zoom, having your Bluetooth work to a speaker, because it wouldn't connect. So it was literally a trial and error. They're like, why don't we just plug you in? And so they had this really short cord that they plugged into this crappy speaker, and got me talking. And I asked them, I said, can you guys hear me, to the players? And they said, yeah. And then I didn't really coach that day. I was just trying to figure out if the speaker and all that other stuff was working. And then it was kind of on after that, as far as, being able to coach. And there was some difficulties with that as well, but we finally figured out a way to get me to actually feel like I was there, where the kids would, they'd look back at the iPad as if they were looking at the coach, because they were hearing something come out of it. So,
in looking at that, in coaching, especially technique, right? I guess the challenge is you can see it and they can hear you. How did it change, I guess, your mode of coaching? Usually out on the field, you maybe can demonstrate some things, show them footwork or hand placement or those kinds of things. How did you deal with that? What were the things you had to become better at and emphasize more in being that talking head on a screen?
that's a great question, because that's part of the details in the Sports Illustrated story that weren't, really discussed. It was like, how did it actually go, and the depth of it. And early on, Coach Zank or another coach, they broke the periods down to defense and offense. So there's extra coaches to come around and kind of, usually it was Coach Zank who had some free time to come by my position group and kind of go over what I was saying, if there was confusion on things like hand placement, or the length of your step, or, where, the depth, how low you're supposed to get, and, all the football pieces that you can't do physically. But one thing I tried to make sure of is that I was short with my sentences, tried to use trigger words, that the kids weren't necessarily used to, but I couldn't sit there and talk the whole time. That would have been a nightmare, to try and go, okay, this is how we're doing this. And all of a sudden the time period of the 5 minutes I had, or whatever it was, because Coach Zank was really organized with practice on minute. And I knew that. And I had actually I have two monitors that I look at, and I had the practice plan to my right as I was looking at the screen. So I knew what was coming time-wise. So I had to be quick. But yeah, there was definitely some football IQ issues with the players. And so I'd have to quickly change, get lower, use those triggers. And it was frustrating to a point. But then what was really great about it is that some of the kids within the group figured out what I was saying quicker than others. So what happens? They start coaching each other, and you could see them putting hand position, be here, take this step. And they were doing it without me saying anything. And it was awesome. It started becoming this life of its own, especially as the season went on. There's one time where it was really, the weather was terrible outside, because, up in Alaska, it gets bad quick. And the girls didn't want to go down the field. They were too cold. So they wanted to stay in the press box. And so they put me on a tripod, and I kind of let them stay in there for a little bit. Like, girls, I'm going to end up having to go down there. And the defensive practice had started, and they kind of pointed the camera out, or the iPad out. And sure enough, the outside linebackers were doing a drill that we had run on their own with no coach, because it was like they finally, it just took it on, they didn't need me there. And it was like the proud papa moment of like, these guys are, they don't need me, even though they needed me. And then I told the girls, okay, time to go, let's go. And they, oh no, I'm like, it's raining and gross, and I got to get out there, I got to be there. So, but yeah, that was a challenge that we overcame. It wasn't instant, but it was definitely something we worked through, and it wasn't perfect. Definitely would rather be there hands
Sure.
on and grab jersey and lock your arms out and do this and that. And, um, we'll have to get more creative with how we could do that in the future, and get better. It's just like you would as any other coach, trying to get better, trying to figure this out and make it better. So,
Yeah, I love that part where you told about how the players really started becoming the coaches. And I'd always tell my guys, like, you know, we can have two sets of eyes looking at this, or we can have, 20 sets of eyes looking at this and helping each other out. And I think when you can get your team to that point, you just become so much better. I don't know when that is. I think younger kids have a harder time with that. I've seen, thinking back to some of the high school teams I coached, juniors and especially seniors being able to do that. The college kids got pretty good at it once they understood the systems. Usually by their sophomore year, they can help coach each other up. And but that is so important. It's really then we talk about mental reps all the time. Coaches talk about that. I'll get your mental reps. Well, what is that really? And that's being able to see what's going on and process it, and even being able to coach somebody else up. I think that just helps improve them as players exponentially as compared to standing in line and waiting their turn and being directed. And so I guess by the nature of this setup, you were able to get that maybe sooner than later with these guys.
yeah, I think it was like an unexpected outcome, right? We struggled with me not being there physically, but then you have to adapt, including, they had to do that. It wasn't an option because I wasn't there walking them through. We talked about, like, time to take the training wheels off, numerous times. Like, you got to be able to do this without me around, and that kind of stuff. And it happened, I think, like you said, it was quicker. It was a quicker process, which was good for them, because they had to do it, because there's just times I wasn't there. I was only at practice for the defensive session. So if there's any other defense that popped up that I missed, which is not that often, they would have had to take care of themselves. So, and again, it didn't happen right away, but definitely we had a lot of time. There was numerous games that were postponed, and there were weeks that we just had practice and not a game because of COVID. So that helped in a way to be able to understand how I worked and the system that we were doing and whatnot. So, it was definitely a strange year all the way around. And then to add this into it, and that's really part of the reason I looked at it going back, like, this is an opportunity that might not ever happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like I was trying to be the first one, here, I wasn't expecting Sports Illustrated to write a story. I mean, this is just organically like, hey, I could teach from California and coach physically in Alaska. That was the original plan, was to go there and be there and coach for a couple months. I had gotten the okay from my wife to just stay up there. And I'm like, I'll just do the distance learning. I didn't need to be present for that. And so when that kind of got muddied up just because of the uncertainty and will we go back to school, or how's that going to look, and can I even get up there, that then the virtual piece like took over the whole situation. But like I said, not being able to get up there and doing the virtual coaching, made, I think, me better as a coach. It made me calm down. I was able to see things from a more of a relaxed state, even though felt myself yelling at my computer screen often. But yeah, I mean, I think we all adapted to the conditions that were presented to all of us.
So in terms of the setup and how Coach Justin runs things, did you guys have meeting times and install times like that preseason? Were you able to meet with your
No,
players, in a classroom situation?
No. So it was, at Homer, the football in Alaska is a lot different than I'm used to in California and maybe across the country. In Homer, most of the kids on the team like work on fishing boats or they're right there on the water, and their livelihood, their family's, income is based on fishing. And so their summer off season is not in the weight room. It's not practicing football. It's on a boat or wherever they are with fish. And so adding COVID to that, having kids even showing up to practice early on and was a struggle. And when they found out up in Alaska that their season was actually going to be played 2 weeks before the first game, but there was no off season at all. Like nobody had an off season.
Mm-hmm.
So even if Homer was going to try and do a little bit in the off season or in that summer, they didn't get the chance to it, and nobody did. So the first time I was on the field with them on the iPad, but like I said, it went for a good week or so before I started coaching. And then we had a game. We literally had a game the next week. So we had zero time. We installed a few items that would just get us by as far as defensively. And let's go. We got a game, and that's just kind of how it was. We met as coaches once or twice on the weekend, pretty short meetings, but I never really met with the players until later in the season when we started watching film on Mondays. But a couple weekend meetings with the coaches, and that was it. And again, we didn't have a lot of time. It just came upon us, and we had to go.
So in terms of I do want to talk about game day. We'll get to that in a second, but just thinking of the player-coach relationship, right? It's something, trust is important for you to be able to get what you want out of those guys. How do you do that remotely? How do you do that virtually?
Well, I stuck to a plan of like giving my knowledge to the kids in the coaches. I didn't, I ended up sometimes joking with them, and sometimes, I just stuck to being a coach. And I would, if they made a mistake, I was making them push-ups. And I had a plan of like, I'm going to coach these kids as if I was standing right there.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of told them I was going to do this stuff, but I didn't really like say why. Like, you make a mistake, you owe 5 push-ups. And the kids would do, I'm like, do them. Like I wasn't really there to yell at them face to face, but kids would they realized this wasn't a joke. I was there. That was the other thing. I was present every opportunity I had to coach something with them. I was at every meeting. I never missed anything. I was on vacation with my wife up in Lake Tahoe, and it was a Friday night, late summer. And she's like, "Where are we going to dinner?" I'm like, "Well, I got practice." She wasn't overly happy about that, but I said I could sit. You go to the lake, sit on the beach for a few minutes because practice won't take that long today. And I was in the hotel room on my phone cranking out practice for 45 minutes or an hour. And again, it was like being present at everything, being able to install some of the stuff that I think would work for us, as a team. So that, there's a lot of buy-in from the coaches and the kids just because they knew I was there and I was always there. And I think that bought me, some equity with them because they knew I wasn't just there for a day and then showed up on game day and that
Right.
kind of stuff. They knew it was real. And so, yeah, I got them moving, told the managers, I'm like, you follow them around. If they're walking, I'm going to yell at them and get their butts moving. And, that it was, easier than I thought it would be. And, the kids were receptive. And I think they understood, that I didn't have a lot of time with them. I told them that I don't have a ton of time. I can't talk to you. Let's get these reps right. If you're not, you're going to do, it wasn't every time they were doing push-ups, but it was like, one situation, there's a kid that came over to play outside linebacker that kind of didn't buy into the whole virtual thing for that day. Maybe he was having a bad day. And I didn't hear what he had said, but he made a comment about, like, why are we even doing this or something to Coach Zank. And Coach Zank lost his head just screaming at the kid. And I'm like, what's going on? Because I could it's hard to kind of hear coming back.
Sure.
And unless they're really close to the iPad. And then Zank walks up to the iPad. He's like, Coach, we're done for the day. And it was only like 10 minutes into practice. Like, he basically sent me away. Not that I did anything wrong, but he just needed a moment to rip the team for, like, this is a serious thing that we're doing, and quit wasting his time. And he knows a lot. He's, and this kid was kind of he struggled with a lot of things, throughout the season, and that only happened once. But again, it was early on, so I think that bought me some credibility. Like, you don't waste his time, guys, because he's here helping us. So, but yeah, as far as like relationships with the kid, like I said, I ended up starting to joke with him, like when I found time in between a drill or something, a special teams moment where, like, some of my kids weren't on the field for that, and I'd had the managers go over and I'd talk to them. I started, how's school going? Tried to build that relationship like you would if you were there. And I was just kind of starting to get to that, and then the season ended. So, it's definitely, I would have had a little bit more of a relationship, I know for a fact, if I was physically there. But
Right.
I think it could end up being something, now that I've done it, to work on that a little bit earlier. I think I can get them on my side quicker now that I've done it once,
So transitioning to that game day, the whole different mechanics of how this operates there. I imagine getting your feed through what, huddle, or how did you guys work that?
So what I would have loved to do is if they had like a huddle sideline set up.
Okay.
I would have loved to have like huddle pop up the game feed, like I was on the sideline with an iPad, and then still be on the Zoom call. But that wasn't the case. So they basically put me in the press box, like another camera to film, and one of the
So
girls
you
would.
were just running off of Zoom in the iPad feed.
Yep.
Okay.
And then they had another iPad or a camera, whatever, to film the game normally.
Right. Okay.
And then the first game, I don't know how they set it up, but a coach plugged like an earbud into the iPad and put me, I guess you could, however you want to say it, put me into his ear, but then had his headset onto the sideline. And so he was like a conduit down to the sideline for the calls. And I thought it worked pretty good. I think there was a lot of crosstalk, how that goes in headsets. And that might have, because they kind of killed it the next week. I'm like, oh, that was great for me, but I think it might have been tough for all, them to hear everything. So it ended up becoming a situation where the coach that was in the booth went down to the sideline, and he would just call me on his phone. So we would talk. So if you see the pictures with my phone up to my mouth, in the Sports Illustrated story and other videos, I'm talking to him while I'm watching the action, and we would go from there. And then if you look at the video closely, I'm clicking my computer. I had like a spreadsheet up, and I kept asking for like what the call was. So I had like a call sheet. So when I go back and watch film, I knew what we called on that play, so I could critique it, in film session later, instead of, how you do that where you guess, what was that called? What were we in there? I was trying to stay on top of that, like live. And so I had it dialed in when I watched film. Okay, play number 4, we were in this defense. And then it just helped me with my breakdown after the game. And then I would just watch, and hopefully the internet would stay stable enough. And, the girl on the tripod would turn the camera the right way. And, there was one game where the press box and Homer, they didn't really give me a great spot to sit and see the action. So the left hand part of the screen had like a post in the way, and then the glass to the left was like damaged, and so it's like that constant foggy, gross, dirty sheen on it. And so if the ball went to the right, I could see everything clearly, but if it went to the left, it was like looking through like you had bad eyesight, and you weren't wearing glasses. It was kind of terrible. And then for them to get past the pole, they would just tip the tripod. So there's one particular game where I'm like, my head's at a 45-degree angle looking at the action. I'm like, you guys are good, I could see it. Because it was like, hopefully we weren't going to be there too long. And then when the action would go back to the right, I'd kind of sit up straight like normal and follow it along. So, I mean, there's always those kind of issues, but we didn't talk about it. That was the other thing. I didn't make a big deal of that stuff because we had, it was game day, and I'm not going to sit there and go, girls, can you like maybe go find another location? And I wasn't difficult. I'm
Right.
like, we just made it work, because I know that. And I also thought of my game day experiences live, like everybody's got a lot of stuff they're doing. So me adding more to their plate by being kind of difficult with where I'm placed and that kind of stuff. I was just glad they turned me on, and it was on time. Like, that was the cool thing about coaching virtually, is from, home, is like game time would be at 2:00 on a Saturday, and I'd plop down at 2:00, phone call, from coach, hey, we're about to kick off. Boom, the Zoom meeting would come on. So I didn't have to do any of the pregame warm-ups, any of those things. And it was nice. I mean, I want to do that stuff, but that's just not how we did it. And as soon as the game was over, I'd turn it off and I'd go do whatever. I wasn't, it was like if it was a 2-hour game, it was 2 hours for me. And, I could have probably gotten the iPad brought down to the team huddle after and talked to the team. Hey, great job today. Look good out there, or whatever. But that just wasn't what we did. Maybe that's something we need to add in the future, and even at halftime, they didn't bring me in to like make adjustments and stuff. And I kind of that's a part of that mentorship with the coaches, was like, they finally realized what we were doing. So let you guys make the adjustments. Tell me if anybody's injured, we're putting somebody else in, all those things. And then I just kind of backed off. Hey, let's go play football. And then I basically would, and game day operations for me was also suggesting, hey, good time to do this here. One of the teams I had noticed they were quarterback sneaking on 3rd and 4th and short, and they had a 4th down. I don't think our coaches realized that it was 4th and short, because being at home watching it, I'm in a calmer environment, right?
Right.
Nothing's distracting me, nothing at all. And I just like quickly, we ran like a double A gap blitz, and I'm like, call it right now. We're gonna do it, and it was a late call, and they ran a quarterback sneak, and we stuffed the guy for like a 2-yard loss. And being able, they weren't going to call that. Maybe the guy gets a first down easily if that call doesn't come in, and so I was able to kind of, I think, see things in a different light. It felt like when you call a game from the press box, whether offense or defense, I
Hmm.
was able to
Yeah.
see a line, and I would help Coach Zank on offense a little bit. He did a good job on his own, but I would be like, tell him, there's no flat defender on the weak side. I don't know what we're doing with our offense, but if you've got a pass to the flat, it's open, that kind of stuff. So
Hmm.
having an extra set of eyes for the offense was also kind of what I did as well. So
Yeah, I imagine if, all the technology is right, game day is probably a little bit easier than the practices, as well as, imagine game planning and your involvement in that, we've all gotten used to being in Zoom meetings and getting our work done that way, and, working with people, and that's in a different environment as well. So I could see those being a little bit more fluid in the transition to it than how do you do this on the field.
yeah, I mean, and I didn't move. Like I said, being on a tripod on game day was probably a lot easier than practice because those girls got to work out. I told them to line up right behind the linebackers, like 2 yards behind the linebackers, so I could see the tackle box in practice, and which put them in harm's way with the free safety coming up. And and I said, you guys got to be careful. I put you in a spot that's kind of danger zone, the Bermuda Triangle right here, and they were great doing that stuff. But it kind of wore off because early on it was kind of fun and they were having fun with it, and then they realized that they're gonna have to do this every day, and that I had them moving all over the place constantly to get a better angle, because it is kind of hard to see. It's definitely not like you can't stand in your normal coaching spot
Right.
that you would on at a practice. And so to get the right angle in practice was difficult, but definitely on game day it was a lot easier because, like I said, just being on a tripod and in the press box was a lot easier for them to just kind of pan left and right to get the action for me to see.
So I know we all hope that 2021 gets back to normal. Um, and but let's say uh, you do this again. What were your takeaways, and what are the things that you've already said? These are the things I need to work on, just personally from my coaching standpoint, and the things I do, and then also looking at it from the technical side and what you would suggest maybe to other people who might be looking at this.
well, I'm looking at it like, well, first of all, I was going to go up there for the playoffs and try to get to at least one game. And I had booked my flight really twice. And that's a really long story, that a story of an in of itself. But to keep it short, I booked the flight. The games changed. They got pushed back a week. That threw me off. So I ended up finding a time to go up there for the first playoff game. Um, Again, but it all didn't happen. But my point is I booked the flight, paid for it, and then couldn't use the flight. So I've got this voucher through Delta Airlines. And so I told Coach Zank that maybe I spend a couple weeks in the summer up there live, installing, helping, doing what I can for however long, I need to be up there. Because we don't know their practice. I don't know how that works. And then resuming the virtual stuff in the fall. Couple things. Personally, Alaska is an hour behind me in California time-wise. So even if I was teaching classes regularly on campus, like back to normal, as we say, next fall, I could come home, have a good hour to kind of do whatever I need to do, and then they practice at 4 o'clock their time, which is 5 o'clock my time. And so that buffer, I was, that worked out great for me to always be that 1 hour difference. And so as far as helping other people, like if people want to do that, you got to make sure that time, wherever you're coaching, it might be in the same time zone, but just be careful of the time differences. I would think you would want to be ahead wherever you are of the time, if you're trying to help another team in a different state or wherever, because it's, you really gotta, there are times I'm like, his Coach Zhang's practice plan had Alaska times on it. I was making sure that I was there on time and that kind of stuff. So, but as far as everything else, I'd like to be able to, if I do it again, go through a summer, try and be in the weight room virtually, try and do all those things we couldn't do, and get going with some things earlier, so we don't come into the season literally really not knowing anything at every position, offense and defense, special teams, everything. And so I could see it being more streamlined just because now we know how to do it. Some smaller details with the setup of the equipment to make it smoother for everybody. Yeah, I mean, I don't see why I couldn't continue to do it if they'll, if they'll have me, kind of thing, and then go from there. I looked at it from the beginning as, if you have all this equipment, I didn't see it being a problem besides a good internet connection.
Right.
And people freak out and be like, this is, the first coach ever to do this. And I'm like, it's weird, because I just thought it seemed pretty normal to me. The equipment's there. We have this technology to do this. But yeah, I could see how it definitely, it really was on Coach Zank and the staff to let me do it. I think coaches have a lot of ego, and even if you had a new coach come to the staff, physically, that there's that breaking in period, and then all of a sudden I pop into a Zoom meeting at Coach Zank's house with these coaches, and I'm introducing myself and there's a lot of that, but we kind of pushed past that pretty quickly and just got to like, let's go win some football games, so.
Well, really cool story, and thank you for sharing all the details of it and the things that worked, the things that could get better. I've enjoyed following you. I think I maybe first saw this might have been on Football Scoop and kind of followed along a little bit, and I love the idea. I think it gives a chance, maybe if you're at a school there are those schools out there who hurt for experienced coaches, who need coaches who are mentors. And I could see, this probably isn't for everybody, but I could see those situations where we have this really experienced coach who's willing to do this from across the country. Can't be in here in person, but is willing to give us our time. I think coaches could take advantage of this now, or teams
Yeah.
could take advantage of this as well.
Yeah. And that, if people have questions, they could reach out to me through Twitter or any way possible. I did post videos on this because I started to record my Zoom meetings, and then I chopped up a lot of the good parts, and then threw a couple up onto YouTube. And it wasn't more, my big thing is not to like become some celebrity that's doing, there was none of that at all with all this stuff. I was just kind of showing people what I was doing, and I kind of waited to post something on Twitter once we started doing games, and I posted a clip, about a 30-second clip of our linebacker crushing one of the running backs and me getting all excited on a Zoom meeting. And that kind of took off. Again, it wasn't meant to be anything but a tweet, and it became something that people caught on to, and people have reached out and asked me, what it takes. And it's not so much, like I said, the equipment to do it. Everyone can get their hands on all the stuff that that you need. It really, I think it's a testament to Coach Zank, his staff, the kids that were on the other end. And I don't really know how he pitched it to them. I mean, I just showed up and the girls were on, I don't know how hard he had to explain to the girl, like, did he tell them they had to do this? Did he, whatever he did on his end, it was really seamless, and everybody kind of bought in, and it was it was really nice. So if you've got that kind of situation where you just kind of do it, little trial and error. My analogy is like, we didn't touch our toe into the pool to check the water. We dove in and did it and worked through, anything, bad internet connection days. Some girls didn't show up to, and one day I had a kid who was injured had to carry me around, and because there was no team managers there that day. I mean, just that kind of stuff just kept popping up, and you just have to, like football coaches do, you have to adapt and move on. So.
Absolutely. Well, we will share the links to some of your YouTube and our show notes for our listeners. Please check out our webpage, our new webpage, our home for the podcast, which is at coachandcoordinator.com. And follow me on Twitter at Coach K. Grabowski. Follow Coach. Coach, could you give us your Twitter handle?
It's at To The House.
At To The House. Coach,
Yeah.
Thank you again. And, best of luck here. And we'll keep up with you and watch what you're doing here in the next year.
Appreciate your time, Coach. Thanks for having me.
Thank you again for listening to the Coach and Coordinator podcast. Please, if you are enjoying the podcast, head over to iTunes or Spotify and click 5-star for a rate. If you have a minute, write a review. It really helps the podcast. Check out our new home for the Coach and Coordinator podcast. That's at coachandcoordinator.com. And follow me on Twitter at Coach K. Grabowski.